Hey friends, Ashley Burgess here, and we're live here on YouTube right now. This is a lot of fun. I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I hope so. This is my second go live here on YouTube, and it's definitely an interesting experience. Definitely for the lag time here in the recording is always very interesting. So today I just kind of wanted to start the conversation and talk about, seeing the day differently. And I kind of just thought about it today. It's the beginning of a new week. It's a new day, and I think oftentimes when we incorporate a new perspective, we have a tendency of really appreciating the time and space that we're in, and really, for that matter, the cool stuff that we can do. Even though we have to go through, obstacles, setbacks, overcoming adversity, all these things that do play a part in our daily life. But in reality, the things that we can overcome, the things that we can get to, the things we can understand, but better yet, how to really think about that perspective in a certain way, shape, and form that not only works, but makes sense. So today is, for many of us, is Monday. I know around the world it's not necessarily so. It could be Tuesday for you as well. But let's just say it's a new day. And I remember waking up this morning, and I don't know about you, but right before I get out of bed, I have like this ritual, okay? And it's worked really good for me. It's worked really well for me. And I started doing it because I realized that the way we go into a situation is very interesting. Hi, Atlas Moon. Good to have you here live on the chat. Appreciate you coming in today. And let me know if you'd like to add to the perspective today as well. So when I wake up every morning, I like to lay in bed for a little while, and I like to just think. I like to ponder, and I like to really focus on what can I do to make this a good day. Like, what are some things that I can focus on doing? Because I'll be honest with you, a long time ago, I used to wake up and go, oh God, okay, here's another day. It's going to go about the same. Nothing's going to get changed. Nothing's going to get better. And I would focus on the negative, or I'd focus on what I couldn't change. And so now I kind of do like a little brief meditation before I get up and get out of bed, and get on your feet. You know how you get out of bed and you do all your stuff. But before I do that, I really focus on what can I do to make this day an amazing day, and what kind of mindset can I get in to do that as well. Okay, and that's really important because it's really worked. And a long time ago, when I'd hear people talking about, like, positive affirmations and that kind of thing, you kind of think about platitudes and all this kind of stuff, and you go, how is that really going to work? And I agree, sometimes when we're just positive for being positive's sake, just saying whatever, I think it's a good stance to be in, but I think we need to be forthcoming in our direction. So what I'll do when I'm laying in bed before I get up, the alarm's already gone off, and I'll give myself like 5 minutes on the phone on a timer before I need to get out of bed, because I want to make sure I don't fall back asleep. But I do want to kind of just relax, and I'll just kind of go into that moment and visually see my day going well. I'll visually see my day working out. I'll visually see things coming to fruition, and I'll definitely visually see a smile on my face. I'll visually see myself walking through things, being successful in achievement, and at least getting things done that I need to get done. And it goes really far as far as believing in myself, but also it's almost like seeing something before it happens, right? I think we have the power to create certain things, or to make certain things a reality. And if you've ever played the game of golf, and I haven't played that much, but when I have played, I've really enjoyed myself. But with the golfer's stance, and when they practice putt, or they practice, they're seeing themselves hit the ball into the hole, and they're visualizing that. And I think if you think about that on a daily basis, visualizing on a daily basis what you want to create, thinking about that, seeing yourself successfully go into that meeting, right? Seeing yourself successfully have a conversation with a manager, or in an interview, or with a client. Successfully seeing yourself create something. I know a lot of us might not work in what I would consider, or what you would consider, a creative job. we like to. We're creative human beings. And so trying to find that space in our career that allows us to be creative is pretty cool too. And being creative about what we have to do on a daily basis and finding more of that purpose within that. And that's always pretty awesome too. And that's something that I really focus on. So going back to my routine, and this is just ideas. These are things that I do. And if you try it and it works, great. If you tried it a couple times, you say, hey, I've tried it a few times. Actually, it's not really working for me. But I think if you give it a chance, it will at some point work, because when we practice something or we go through something and we actually focus and give our energy and attention to it in a positive way, we can move mountains. So, okay, so there I am laying in bed. It's before the 5 minute, curfew, the 5 minute alarm clock coming on. And I really just focus on what I need to do, the stuff that I need to get done, me successfully doing it, and then kind of going through that process of that day and all my interactions working out, really connecting with people, but also it kind of adds to my self-esteem, because it's like you've already done it before, and it's already like you're already on the positive side of it, and you're already going into that day with a positive perspective and a positive outlook. So I get out of bed. Normally the 5 minute doesn't go off because I'm already anticipating it, because I do this like every day. And so that's just kind of a safeguard in case, I kind of really go into that meditation and I just pass out, which happens sometimes when you're tired, because we don't want to always get up at the same time we have to get up every day, but, work and responsibilities. So anyway, I get up and then I normally make coffee. I'm a bit espresso person, and I like to have a cup of espresso, and I like to just kind of go outside, and I like to look up to the sky, and I like to see the puffy clouds, and if there are any, and I like to just kind of breathe the air. And where I'm living right now, I live in a really warm climate area in the summer. So we're about 100 degrees in the summertime for highs, about 102, 103. So when you get up early in the morning, you get to experience those few hours before it gets stifling hot, And so you get out there. So I'll go outside, I'll have my espresso. And then the next thing I like to do is I like to go take the dog out for a quick walk and get him out after he eats and come back in. Because it's always fun, because dogs are interesting beings, because they're like little children. I consider my dog like a 2-year-old, and he's great. He's 7 years old in dog years. Well, I think that's people years, what have you. I don't know what that is about. I guess it's 70 or no, I guess it's 7 times 7, so it's 49 years, right? That's what they claim. But he's like a 2-year-old, and he's a sweetheart. And watching him, even though he can be so bullheaded, is so much fun, because I get to see him, like, every new piece of grass is new, every flower is new, something to pee on, something different. Oh wow, there's somebody new. And it really, not only does it calm my mind, but it also allows me and reminds me of some stuff that I wrote in one of my books. And my latest book is the 10-day challenge to live your true life. And there's a part of it that I talk about the way of the dog. And the way of the dog is like everything is new and improved, and everything is awesome when you're a dog. I mean, when you're treated well and you have great people that take care of you, going on that car ride or getting dinner, even if it's the same dinner you got every single time, it's awesome and it's great. And I think if we lived our lives a little more like that, and I know some people go, well, that's easier said than done, and I get it. And there was times in my life where I thought, could it be any more humdrum? Could it be any more boring? Is there ever anything new going to happen in my life? Or am I always going to be stuck in this crap? And I've been there. And when I began to see the forest through the trees, and I began to realize that I also can impact my surroundings, and I'm a powerful spirit being, right? And we have this power within us, and if we just see it, because we can see ourselves as being powerful, just like we can see ourselves as being powerless. To me, being powerless is like being victimized to some degree. It's like being that victim, and I've been there before in my life, and I don't like it. It's not my thing, and I don't think many people like it. It's actually quite painful, and you come from a victim mentality, but you also come from a position of being powerless, and it's almost like you feel like everything's happening to you, and to me that just didn't work out very well. So the way of the dog is a kind of a thing that I talk about in my book. It's like philosophy, really, a perspective of life, perhaps. Of the dog sees everything new, and when it sees everything new, it relates like that. So like every single situation, going out is new, Going to lunch is new, going to work is new. Even if you're dealing with somebody that you really can't stand or you have a difficult time with at work or at school, being able to see that situation um, in a new perspective, and being able to kind of look at it from almost the outside looking in. And what I mean by that is oftentimes when we're in stressful situations, we have a tendency of kind of feeling like things are happening to us and we don't feel very powerful. But when we kind of step back and see it as a new situation, it's almost like watching a movie or like being in a laboratory, right? Where you can watch things happening and you're part of it, but it's not like it's happening to you. You too have the opportunity to make changes to it. And so I like to use the way of the dog in the morning to really focus on that, because it really puts things into perspective so that when I walk into situations every day, I don't get overwhelmed by, oh gosh, this is boring and this is lame and I don't want to do this. Instead, I'm like, okay, let me look at it from another perspective. Even though this person might have a tendency of making my life somewhat difficult sometimes, let me look at it from a different way. Let me kind of step back from that and just see it almost like I'm watching a movie, and be able to see that person's ins and outs, their personality, and start to understand maybe what makes them go, what their reason for it, why they act a certain way, why they talk a certain way, and maybe why they get very stressed out or what have you, and kind of get to learn a little bit and then understand about my interactions. I like to do these live things now. This is kind of fun, and I kind of want to make it more like a community of us all talking about the stuff that we're doing and the things that we're working on, but also some of the things that actually motivate you definitely can impact other folks on this channel. And I've done some recent videos. I actually had a show come out yesterday, one of my radio shows on stress, and that was a very cool show. And I know a lot of us deal with stress differently, and some of us deal with it better than others, and sometimes some of us deal with it better one day and not as good the other day. And I'll be uploading that here to YouTube, I think either tomorrow or the following day. And it'll also be up on Spreaker as well. And so the shows are always kind of based on things that you can do to better your life, things that you can do to overcome adversity, stuff that you can implement in your daily life that will impact you and resonate and move your life to that higher resonating frequency. And I don't know about you, but I think anytime we can get some tips to being more successful or happier or healthier, it's definitely something that's a good thing. One thing that I've always learned to live by is that I always want to be better than I was yesterday, and that's important to me. And I used to think for a long time it was about being better than other people. And I felt like there was a scarcity principle, like, if somebody got something, then what about me? I mean, they got this or they got that, and how is that going to impact me? And I've realized that the more successful the people are around me, quite conveniently, if I look at it in the right perspective, the more successful I am. And sometimes that can be hard. It can be hard when you're wanting to do something in life and you're working really hard toward it, and you've been working and paying your dues for a long time, and you see other people reaping all these benefits and getting all these things, and you kind of feel like, wow, when is it going to be my turn? And that's understandable. And I've been there. And I catch myself occasionally going there sometimes as well. When you see someone that it seems like everything is working out for them perfectly, and their career is skyrocketing, or they have a wonderful family, or whatever it is that you're looking at, it can be very interesting. And so oftentimes when we step back from that, and I like to use that stepping back because it works really with anything. Anytime we're too close into the situation, our emotions get the best of us, right? We internalize things, we take things personally, and I do it too. And the only reason I can even talk about this stuff is I've been on both sides of this equation. I've been on the side where I was so wrapped up emotionally in a situation that I couldn't deal with it, and that other people could see the solutions and I couldn't. And I've been on the other side where I can conveniently see the solutions, and I can see it for what it is. And it just took me to step back a little while, kind of calm it down, breathe, not take everything personally. And that's an interesting thing, too, that I want to segue into right now. And all this is kind of just fly by the seat of my pants. This is a non-scripted live video here, so I hope that it impacts to some degree, and I'd love to hear from y'all as well. What y'all are working on too about dealing with, being better than you were yesterday, but also, you know, how do we really focus our life on what we need to focus on, and for that matter, what should we be focusing our life on anyway? I think a lot of it has to do with up dealing our responsibilities, dealing with our responsibilities, overcoming adversity. But how do we do this, and how do we see adversity as something that's good? I read a lot of self help books. I've written some myself, and I understand that some of it seems a little easier said than done. But I think oftentimes we realize that in the human condition, we will have adversity. How we see it is different. It's almost like seeing opportunity versus responsibility, right? Um, a lot of times when you are given an opportunity, it comes in the form and a look of another responsibility and another thing to put onto your plate. It does not seem easy, it seems challenging, and it seems what? Very highly inconvenient. Okay? And that's always been interesting about opportunity. Is usually we think that opportunity is something that you just, oh wow, here you go, look, we're going to give you this. Oh, hey, Ashley, we're giving you this big deal to MC this huge event, and here, just, we found you. And we're so happy to find you. And oh my gosh, you're going to love this. It's going to be great. It's going to be great for your career. Okay, yeah. Most of the time, an opportunity doesn't sound like that at all. It could be like, hey, we could really use your help in volunteering for this. And you go and volunteer, and then the next thing you're doing something else, and then the next thing you're doing something else, and then all of a sudden, by the way, could you MC this event? And it's usually not easy breezy, and it's usually a tough road ahead. But as we kind of pay our dues, and as we recognize the fact that the more we do for others, the more that'll be done for us. And sometimes that can be hard to grasp, especially when you feel like you have been paying all the dues, doing everything for everybody, and have seen little results. And so, what do you do in that situation? I'd love to hear from y'all, because in that situation, I usually try to look at it from a different perspective. Hey, I know opportunity usually comes in the form of another responsibility. I know that the things that I want to do, a lot of other people want to do. I know that the things that I'm doing are some really great stuff, and I know that I'm working toward some amazing stuff and have some amazing projects here in the works. But I'm really happy about my career, my family. I'm happy about my clients. I love working with my clients. I love seeing them being better than they were yesterday. I love being able to relish in the change and the joy, and overcoming that self-defeat, and finding that true belief in self, and finding that self-esteem. Because I think self-esteem is one of those things that is hard to get sometimes, because in our young ages, in our young life, we were told, like, hey, by somebody told us we were no good, or we were an idiot, or we weren't smart enough. And maybe we got picked on at school, and we started buying into that stuff, and maybe our parents weren't always there, and life was really tough. And so overcoming that, and some of us had, issues. We had sicknesses, diseases, what have you, and those can really impact you too, because you feel like, hey, why am I the kid that has this problem? Or, when you were a kid and your parents were divorced and they had custody issues, and you were constantly going from one house to the other, and that can really weigh on your self-esteem, but that can also really weigh on the anger quotient, right? And then the frustration. And I think a kid needs to be a kid, but most of us didn't have that upbringing of just being a child. You see some of those kids that look just so happy because, thank God, they've had a life where they didn't have to deal with adult problems. And I think many folks, especially, I think very highly intelligent folks, and I think folks that have been through a lot of trauma and a lot of drama when they were kids, understand what I'm talking about, because you've been through it. You were the kid that might have been 7 or 8 years old that was trying to help mom or help dad, or maybe mom was crying and dealing with those situations. And that is very impactful in our life, and that can really help us to see our life path and our purpose and overcome adversity. But at the same time, it's like when you're growing up, you were wondering where that childhood was. And I find that very interesting, because I think we all have these interesting directions in our life, and none of them are the same, right? We're all different, and we all have a different road to travel. And that different road that we travel directly relates to our direction and our purpose and the way that we go. And I think sometimes we can choose, like we get overwhelmed. And that's normal. It's a human condition to feel overwhelmed. It's a human condition to say, what am I going to do next? Or things haven't really worked out for me very well. Or where am I going with my life? Or what matters in my life and what do I want out of it? And I think you begin by literally beginning to journal and writing the things down that you love to do. I mean, when you were a kid, what were the things that really, I don't know, what were the things that just got you just going? You know, what were the things that really impacted you? Because like as a kid, I'll give you an example for me. I used to like counsel a lot of my mom's friends, and they were singers and dancers, and I even used to counsel some of my babysitters before I told my mother that I was never going to have another babysitter anymore and that I would prefer to go home on my own and cook my own dinner, which I did from about 7 or 8 on, maybe a little earlier than that. But I always liked working with folks, and I liked listening to them. And I enjoy getting to understand their life. And I like to understand where their life began and where the story began. And it's interesting because I find often, and I did it for a while too, is that we kind of live by our story, right? And we have the story and we have a narrative that we tell a lot of times over and over again. I came from this upbringing, or I had this condition, or I have this condition, or whatever it is. And I've realized that when we're able to step back from our story, again, I'm using these words step back. When we're able to step back from our story and to stop telling that story all the time and to begin a new life, all of a sudden that story doesn't rule our life. And think about what I just said, because it's very interesting, because when our story rules our life, what happens is we can't really go out or deviate from the story, because the story tells a story about a character that happens to be us, and how that character is, the things that the character's like, the thing that the character hates, the things that's wrong. Most of the time, it's what's wrong with the character. And so what do we do about that? Well, when we step back and we realize that we don't have to live the story any longer, and that we can actually rewrite our life, all of a sudden we realize that we are no longer our story. And I know that can be, for some people, it's really refreshing and awesome. And for other people, letting go of that story is very painful, because they've been telling that story their entire life. And I'm not devaluing where anybody came from, and I'm not devaluating the story at all. But what I am saying is that sometimes we have to let go of what's no longer adding to our quality of life. And I guess it was probably about 10 years ago, maybe a little longer, I let go of my story. And I really stopped telling the story probably longer than that, because I didn't like going into situations telling a story of kind of being a victim. You know what I'm saying? Because I might have been telling the story to relate. I mean, maybe to some degree I wanted people to care, or something like that. But I think most of the time when you tell stories like that, all of a sudden you become like the victim. And people treat you like that. And I think that the things that happen to us could be awful. They could be overwhelming. They could be very revealing, what have you. But I think the way we choose to deal with that and to accept that impacts our life to one degree or another. And I would prefer it to impact me on a level where I am able to see things. I'm able to understand the reality of such. I'm able to overcome adversity easier, because I've had adversity in the past. Able to identify when I am kind of going back into old patterns. Being able to identify when I am using that story as a crutch, or using that story to not, to kind of hold myself back. And so when I finally dismissed that story a while back, it was refreshing and awesome. At first it might be scary, because you're no longer identifying yourself as XYZ. You're allowing yourself to be this amazing being with no defining definitions of any sort of negativity. Okay? And that really is amazing. And so when I work with my clients to work with looking at the story, changing that, letting go of the story, moving forward with a positive perspective and getting rid of the narrative and being in the moment, all of a sudden you see the lights come on. All of a sudden you see this amazing awareness. All of a sudden you see that they know the power that they have. All of a sudden they can do anything. And it slowly opens and things start slowly coming about, and it's absolutely amazing. And as you work on that on a day-to-day basis and really focus on when I'm living in the now versus when I'm living in the past or when I'm living in the future, and then what the definitions of myself that I'm putting on. Am I saying I can never do this, or I'm never successful, or oh, these times are always tough, or Mondays are always awful for me. And a lot of times we say those things, we don't even realize we're doing it. We have no idea. Like, I'll listen to folks in session, and they're really working on being in that moment and really offsetting the negative broken record that was created. And I like to talk about the negative broken record because that's the stuff that goes around in your mind that really has no basis in reality, and it's really negative labeling of you, even though you're an amazing person that does amazing stuff. It's like the worst stuff that you do just over and over and over again on an endless, like, broken record about the things you can't do. And so when I'm working with clients in my office or on Skype or on the phone, it's amazing because when I do catch little small things that are kind of going back to that record, we're able to work on mantras, we're able to rewrite that record and create one that really works, but also being aware of when we go back into that narrative. Because the stories that we told for a long time, that narrative has lasted with us for a very long time. And for some of us, it can feel like that baby blanket or the baby toy that we carried around everywhere. When I was a kid, I had a blanket, a blankie. And it was made by my great-grandmother, and I carried it everywhere. And I remember when I went to school, my freshman, I mean, not my freshman year, my first, God, that'd be pretty bad. My first year, I mean, hey, if you had a blanket, well, but my first year, first grade in elementary school, first grade. And I remember I brought my blankie with me in the car. And I had it in the back seat, behind the seat, because I didn't want my mom to see it, because she was dropping me off at school. And so she pulls up into the very front, and we were running late, so the kids were kind of running inside, and I was one of the last kids to get to school. And I open up the back seat, close the front seat, open the back seat, and I grab my little backpack, and I went underneath the seat to get my blankie. And my mom caught me, and she's like, "You can't take your blankie to school; they'll make fun of you." And I was like, "What do you mean? I always carry my blanket." And so, long story short, I ended up like having tears in the parking lot, giving her my blankie, and then having to deal with going into school after like crying that you can't bring your blankie to class. And sometimes our stories like that too. It's so connected to us, and it's something that matters, and we've always had it. We've always held it really close to us, and it's always been part of us, and we identify with it. And it's like our safety blanket. It's like our safety. And when we have to let that go, it can be overwhelming, but it is so freeing. And similar to Blankie, I love that Blankie. I loved it. It had holes in it, everything. I remember I never brought it to school again, but I kept it in my room. And I remember I had a little dog, and I'd wrap her up in it at night. And then eventually it went from being like the dog blanket to it went into a little cabinet underneath my bed. And I had it for a very long time. And it's kind of like our story. We keep it. And eventually we realize that we don't have to hold on to it any longer. And that there's more out there. And then we kind of begin to see it for what it is. And then we realize it's time that we can retire it. And when we retire it, we've kind of slowly, it's kind of like training wheels. It's like we slowly let it go. And we get on the bike and we ride. And it's an amazing feeling, but yet it takes time because we've done this for so long. And I think because we're looking for identity in our life on a constant basis, that we hold on to that story because we feel like that is our identity. But in reality, our identity is what we create right now. So we have the right and the ability to say that we are whatever we want to be. Because we really are everything all at one time. And depending on how we want to deal with it and how we want to be, that story is one of the first things that we have to let go, because the story can hold us back. And let me give you a good example for someone that has overcome illness or has learned to live with it. If your story is directed about illness and how painful it is and how you can't get out of bed during the day, or you can't make something happen, or you're too sick to work or to whatever, but that's no longer really your case because you're working over it, you're telling yourself on a constant basis you can never do anything more because of this. And that's just one example, and that becomes your roadblock. And so your story becomes your roadblock, and then all of a sudden it stops you from being able to do what you want to do in life. And I've lived through that. And I don't want to create my own roadblock. I mean, there's enough roadblocks out there of other people and things that don't want, seem to be holding you down. You're trying to do something, create something in your life. It seems like, there's certain people out there that don't want to ever help, don't want to ever add to it, want to take away from the value. And so why add our own roadblocks then when we might have to deal with societal roadblocks anyway? And so I've realized that story doesn't really do anything to help us. It's an old narrative that's like an old newspaper. And if we kind of go with that, we end up holding ourselves back. And similar to me with the Blankie, if I would have gone into class, it would have probably been, well, it would have been a shit show. And, people would have made fun of me. And that doesn't really bother me that much. But did I want to be labeled, Ashley, the Blankie girl, my whole life? No. And it kind of comes a time where you're like, okay, I can deal with this, and I can hold this story, or I can hold this blanket in a certain time and space, but it doesn't have to define me, and I don't have to have other people define me by it. Same as the story. So if you have a friend or coworker or family member that is constantly talking about their story, and I'd love you to share this video with them. And I don't know, some people will accept it and some people don't want to accept it, because again, when we let go of the story, then who are we? So how do we find out who we are, and how do we begin to figure that out? Because I think it begins with understanding that when we create our own new perspective and we get away from what our parents completely taught us, and some of what our parents taught us were probably pretty good stuff, right? But some of the stuff that our parents taught us was based on their limited life, what they were taught by their parents based on the limitations that they had. And so why put all those limitations in your life when in reality we can let go of some of those limitations of the things that we were told to believe and begin to find what we do believe, venture on our own, understand who we are by being real with ourselves, by really being honest with ourselves. That's what I had to do, is I had to get real with myself. What was I screwing up? What was I doing? What were the roadblocks I was putting in my own life, which was very obvious when I stepped back and looked at it. And then I had to ask myself, why? And that's the biggest question. Well, why am I doing this, for God's sakes? Well, I was doing it because I was scared of being successful. I didn't know what was going to happen next. And I knew that if I stayed in this holding pattern, that I knew what was going to come out of that. But I was also scared to live up to who I really am. And I think a lot of us get scared because we have a lower self-esteem. We don't believe that we can be that, or we can live up to that, or that that's our destiny. We think that we're not the smartest or the fastest or the most beautiful. We feel like we're constantly missing something and that we need something more to define our value. And I know for a fact I felt that way before, and that's like how I devalued my life, was based on the fact that I thought I always needed something more. It's like being the wedding photographer that has to have, okay, well, I have 2 cameras, and then you see another wedding photographer out there with 3 cameras. Oh, well, I'm not good enough. I need 3 cameras. Or I don't have that good enough light kit. I need to update. It's like eventually you got to just go out there and shoot the photography, for God's sakes. And that's the way life is that I think sometimes we can get overwhelmed about all the products and the stuff and the things that we have, and we don't really realize that it's not about all the crap we have. It's about being there and doing something and realizing that we have the ability to do what we need to do. And where does that come from? Beginning to work on your self-esteem. It comes from looking at that broken record and saying, you know what? I'm not these negative things. So how do I transform that? How do I take this broken record and, erase the wrongs, right the wrongs, and come out the other side and be who I am. And that's what I work with my clients all the time, because that's most of the stuff that we have problems with. It comes down to self-esteem issues, okay? Most of us have them. And some of us act like we don't, and some people are extremely narcissistic and they seem like they have everything going on, but they also have some of the most major self-esteem issues. And I think when we realize that our value is the most important thing, but we got to find our value first. And we can't find our value in other people or other things. It has to be within us. If that's the case, then how do we do that? Well, we have to begin by getting rid of the stuff that devalues us. We have to let go of the old ways of thinking. We've got to let go of the things that have held us back. And that can be in our beliefs, definitely in our thoughts. Our actions are a direct response to our thoughts. What we think becomes actions. They become thoughts. They become our way of life. And oftentimes the way we think directly relates to how we act. So if we feel like we're never going to be successful in doing in having a career, when we get that interview, right, we're going to screw the interview up. Even if it was like the best job we could have had and we had every single qualification in our mind by us saying we'll never be successful in business, we're going to go into that interview and screw it up somehow. Because that's human nature when we have those broken records. And so we have to figure out, what are those thoughts that we're having? How does it discredit our value? And how can we change that? Because nobody can give us self-esteem. Nobody can sit there and say, oh, Ashley, you're the best in the world, and I love you, and you should have the highest self-esteem. People can give you the biggest compliments in the world, but if you don't believe them, they don't mean shit. They don't. If you don't love yourself and really feel the love within you and love everything about you, that mold, that pimple, the I don't know, whatever it is, if you can't love everything about you, then you don't love you. And if you don't love you, you can't really go out loving other people, unconditionally, because you don't know how to love yourself unconditionally. I mean, it was a long time that went before I loved myself unconditionally. I found all the problems and all the issues with myself for a very long period of time. I could look in the mirror, and the one thing I find is zero in on that big zit, and I zero in all into it and look at it, and I can't see anything else besides that zit. And that's just sad. And I'd be all in a bad mood because I'd be like, oh my God, I can't go out. I can't do anything. Look how awful this is. I mean, there's no way of hiding it. Am I going to walk around like this all day? And you sit there and you kind of go, well, how do you accept the things that aren't perfect? Well, I think the thing is that how come that's not perfect? And that's what I mean by switching the script, switching the perspective. How come that's not perfect? To me, having a zit means you have oily skin. What's bad about that? The oilier skin you have, the more younger you are. The more vitality you have. The more youthful your skin's going to be. So why is it bad to have oily skin? I don't understand. Why is that not perfect? I mean, if you have a zit, that means you're pretty young. So why is that not perfect? Why is it that we look at those imperfections and we find fault in that? Why can't we look at those imperfections and say, wow, that's kind of interesting. That's different. That's interesting. And I think a lot of times we accept other people's differences, right? We accept their differences. But why is it so hard for us to accept our own? Because I think we're hardest on ourselves most of the time. But I believe that when we're hardest on ourselves most of the time, it's based on the fact that we don't think we're good enough. And I think that's the basis of most people's problems and issues, bar none. And so begin to ask yourself today, am I good enough? And what do I do in my life that I'm happy about? What are the things that I bring to the table that I am pleased about? What are some things about me the qualities about me that I'm very pleased about and happy that I've been bestowed these gifts? And how can I begin to appreciate my entire self? And how can I begin to appreciate all the things about myself? Because once we appreciate those things in our life and we appreciate our whole self, we can then begin to appreciate others for exactly who they are and everything they are. And I find it very interesting because I've gone through this life and I work on a daily basis and I work on this every day, all day. And when I'm working with my clients, I'm constantly working with them on this stuff, and they're seeing constant growth. Because a long time ago, most of us got sold a bill of goods that said that we're not good enough and we're never going to make it to XYZ. And that's just not true. It's only true if we tell ourselves that. It's only true if we tell ourselves that. We create our own guidelines. We can create anything. We can believe in anything. We can say, hey, I'm very educated. I can do this. I can do that. I can put forth this effort, and I believe in the process, and I'm going to create something out of this. Or we can say, what's the use? I'm just not even going to bother. Nothing's going to work out anyway. It's going to be the same as it was the other day. And if you think about it, either one of those are very powerful thoughts. Every thought we have is powerful. And if we think it over and over and over again, do you know how powerful that is? It's like conjuring something. It's like making something happen. And the more we think about it over and over again, that more that repetition, the more that we make something a reality. Think about the last time you thought about doing something over and over again. Or think about when you thought about even somebody, for example, that you haven't talked to in a long time, and the next thing you know, they call on the phone. Or they text you and you're like, oh, that's spooky. That's crazy. Because you thought it. Thoughts are things. They're powerful. And so when we think negative thoughts about ourselves, they're very powerful. It seems like sometimes the negative thoughts can even be more powerful than the positive thoughts. Because I think in the beginning, they're easier to believe. This universe is kind of created on that if you think about it. It's like certain things are easier to believe than others. And then all of a sudden when we flip the script and we realize, wait a second, okay, I am a powerful being. I can create this. I can have this. Now how do I implement this? And what is the language that I use to have the same impact as the negative things that I kept telling myself over and over again? That's a thought to think about. Until next time. In the meantime, I got some great videos coming out for you. Got another video coming out this week. I had one out last week. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on some subject matters and some things that you'd like me to talk about. Also, please add in the comments about maybe some of the live discussions that you would like me to talk about and for you to interact with me, because I'm looking forward to hearing your perspective and the way that you have overcome adversity, what motivates you, and the questions that you have on how to make these changes in your life and what you can do on a daily basis to rid that broken record and to impact your life and to create these powerful thoughts that become powerful things in your very powerful life. Until then, live your true life today.